Hello and welcome into the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here shortly after the MLB trade deadline has come and gone. The dust has settled. The new players are very well aware of where they're headed, and the Toronto Blue Jays have a handful of new players on their team. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jori, we already talked this morning about Shane Bieber, but now we have a couple more trades to discuss. Obviously, the Blue Jays move Will Wagner for Brandon Valenzuela. They add Louis Varland and Ty France from the Twins. And you get a full picture of their trade deadline. How are you feeling about the Blue Jays as they head into August?
So I gave the Shane Bieber Cal Steven deal a C minus
This
this
morning?
morning.
And
This
you're
morning.
switching it up?
I think the Varland deal has certainly, I don't know if it's necessarily an A plus deal, but it's going to obviously bump that grade up at least a little bit if we're talking the whole deadline. Obviously, we're going to include the Seranthony Domínguez deal in that picture, and that's a lot more palatable now. Obviously, Jerome Watts Brown, as we've discussed at length, very talented, but you start to see what the prices were around the league, and all of a sudden that deal feels a lot better. On the
Yeah.
whole, it's good. It's not a great deadline. They didn't swing for the fences for anyone particularly huge. You miss out on a lot of relievers, and a lot of those guys end up on a division rival, and I'm sure we'll get into that. And on the hitting front, Ty France is your only add of any meaningful capacity, if that's even a term you want to use to discuss 2025 Ty France. You know, like a solid B of a deadline, but some missed opportunities for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. Obviously, you look at the full picture. It's Seranthony Dominguez, Shane Bieber, Brandon Valenzuela, Louis Varland, Ty France in, and then out are Jerron Watts Brown, Cal Steven, Will Wagner, Alan Roden, and Kendry Rojas. Obviously, like you mentioned, the prices were pretty crazy. The Yankees maybe seemed like they didn't have to pay a huge price to get a couple of their guys, but I think it was a big price, and you're always going to be a little more fond of your own farm system than you are of other people's farm systems. So, when you look at it, I mean, I think you kind of understand all the deals, you understand the logic behind them all. I think, I kind of said like the sticker shock of the Roden and Rojas price on Varland. I mean, kind of comes off and you're like, whoa, that's a lot. But then, you look into it and Louis Varland, not even arbitration eligible yet. He's not arbitration eligible for this season or next season, and then he doesn't become a free agent until 2031. And who knows
Fake
what
year, a fake year.
it's the 2030s. I don't even know. Is there going to be a Major League Baseball
All we will have is the Bird's Eye View podcast. And by
and
that
Louis
point, we will
Varland?
be discussing, yes, in Louis Varland. And by that point, we will be actually discussing bird watching as opposed to the Toronto Blue Jays.
It's gonna be yeah, it's crazy to think, that players are under contract control that far into the future. The 2030 Blue Jays, I can't even, fathom what the what they'll look like at that point. I think that's, even beyond like Alejandro Kirk's extension. So, it'll be yeah, I mean, it shows you, you get a guy with that much control. And obviously we know this front office kind of loves control, loves doing some business early. It's a guy who you kind of lock into your bullpen for the foreseeable future, or maybe, you try and convert him to a starter. Obviously, he has started in the past, came up as a starter, and kind of really hit his stride with like the full-time transition to the bullpen this year. But even Ross Atkins said during his press conference today that it's something that they would talk with Varland about was maybe, potentially converting him or potentially considering putting him back in the rotation, which, for a team that's losing Chris Bassett and Max Scherzer at the end of the year, would it surprise you if they cal took that into their calculus as they were making this trade?
And also losing Shane Bieber potentially if a
Oh
certain
yeah,
set
that
of
guy too. That
circumstances
guy.
ultimately play out. Yeah, the Varland stuff, I think there's a lot about him that's obviously really projectable and really intriguing. I tweeted it out in 2024, Foolish Baseball, obviously of YouTube, certainly doesn't need our shout out. Mentioned Varland as a guy that had a lot of attributes he really liked and really had some trouble with the long ball. And you look at basically his pre-bullpen year, basically before this year, had a home run rate in the 20s, home run fly ball rate, and his ground ball rate was in the 40s, and it's now in the mid 50s, and the home run fly ball rate has obviously plummeted. And a big part of that is his slider, which obviously had some projectable attributes, was getting killed, and he's moved off of that. He's moved to a curveball, a knuckle curve, and it by all accounts has been a really successful secondary breaking pitch for him. And then of course he's just got a ton of velo, and then on top of that, a ton of extension on his in terms of in terms of his release. Just a lot about him, obviously. That's really projectable as a reliever and potentially as a different starter than he was a couple years ago. So I like the ad. You lose Alan Roden, and I think he has a really good story to start the year, but ultimately the stick wasn't showing, and he's even a little bit old for a prospect. You can kind of stomach that one. You can kind of see the vision. You've got guys like RJ Schreck in the minors, Johandre Pinego. You, I believe, mentioned them before we hit the record button. Just, those are other guys, very similar kind of build or similar situation to him. Even Joey Loperfido to a certain extent, and he's had success in his brief time with the big leagues, obviously, in the last couple of weeks. Bit of a surplus there. And then the other surplus they dip into, obviously, is on the pitching front. And Kenji Rojas, I think he's probably beyond Cal Steven, one of the most intriguing prospects dealt at the deadline. I mean, obviously, Leo DeVralis, I believe. I don't actually know how to pronounce the
Breeze,
last name. Don't worry. Leo DeVries.
DeVries.
That's obviously your number one guy. You don't see the number three prospect in baseball get traded almost ever. First guy since Eloy Jimenez, I think it was, to be a BA top 10 or something dealt. Um, sucks to lose him. We'd heard some stuff, and it just seems like ultimately a guy maybe you weren't as uncomfortable moving off of as opposed to maybe a Johnny King, even though he's not as far along in his development, all the tools to be where Rojas was and then some in the years to come. So I guess it makes sense, but for sure, sticker shock, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you pretty much kind of covered it all there. Obviously, Varland just throwing way harder this year. The knuckle curve, like you mentioned, the whiff rates are crazy. Obviously, he doesn't quite get like the same swing and miss with the fastball, which is a little intriguing given, the fact that he's throwing 98 up there. But I think yeah, you look at the return and Roden struggles this year. Kind of didn't look like the same hitter that he was when he was in the minors. I actually believe I wish I could recall where I heard it, but somebody had compared Roden to Kyle Stowers with the Marlins this year as like, a guy who struggles in his first experience with the big leagues and then gets traded and then kind of breaks out. And like I don't think that Alan Roden is coming out and hitting 20 home runs next year and making the All-Star game. But it's a profile of a player who probably should eventually have some success. And I think that him and Rojas, I think, will both, be productive major leaguers at some point. But, for this Blue Jays team, you needed some bullpen help right now. And, you look at the back end of this bullpen now, right? Like it's Hoffman, it's Seranthony Domínguez, it's Yariel Rodriguez, it's Brendan Little, it's Braden Fisher, it's Louis Varland, it's maybe Jimmy Garcia if you get him back. Like there's just a bunch of dudes back there. And as much as we are going to probably talk about the Yankees and their bullpen additions, like the Blue Jays bullpen is kind of right there with them as far as, being this hard throwing group that's going to rack up a ton of punch outs and hopefully be able to shorten the game for the starters when, the games are going to need to be shortened in the postseason because overall their group of starters aren't guys that you're probably going to want, necessarily going 6 or 7 innings against
Yeah,
good
that's
offenses.
that's a that's that's a good way to put it, right? The bullpen as it stands right now is a really, really, really good group. It's probably the best group I can recall the Blue Jays having.
Since the
Maybe,
2023 bullpen.
I mean, I guess so, but I might even listen. All I'll say is it's a really, really strong group. It's a really compelling group, and big if with Jimmy getting healthy. And I mean, I know Sandlin's also listed here. I don't know what his status is as far as coming back. Not the most optimistic outcome, but it's just you've got basically. seven guys at a minimum that in theory you could toss out there in a setup role at the very minimum,
Yeah.
right? You've got basically six leverage guys. There is no circle of trust. The circle of trust is the bullpen at
The
this point.
circle of trust is John Schneider walking out there and putting up, calling for somebody to come in. You're like, hell yeah, that guy's coming into the game right now. It's gonna work out great. I do want to on Rojas though. Like, I mean, I think upside wise, among, kind of that group of starters that we talked about in the preview, the Rojas, the Steven, the Watts Brown, the Stanford, the Johnny King, like Rojas, like upside wise was probably right at, if not at the top of that group. Which is, obviously kind of the point of why he's in this trade, right? Because he is a guy who you can kind of dream on with the velocity from the left side and being this really effective strikeout pitcher. So yeah, I mean it's obviously a hefty price to pay, but I think when you look at um overall just what the Blue Jays have done on their farm with their farm system this year, and being able to develop guys like Rojas, like Steven, like Watts Brown, and being able to trade them for pieces at the deadline. I mean, it's ultimately like that's part of why you have a farm system, right? Is to be able to tap into it when you need pieces like a Shane Bieber, like a Louis Varland, like a Seranthony Domínguez. So what did you think about the Ty France addition to this trade?
Yeah, I'm not really sure exactly where that fits in. Obviously, he is the Wagner replacement. I mean, there's a pretty one-to-one comparison there. Also, can't help but laugh if you go look at his lollipop charts over at Baseball Savant. You'll never guess what percentile his defense at first base is at. Here's a hint, it's very dark red.
Yeah.
But the first baseman, I know once upon a time played some second base. I don't imagine that's the plan for him at
I
this
think he
stage,
played one game
especially.
this year.
Yeah, like I'd imagine at this point he's probably past that. Um, a modest upgrade maybe on Will Wagner. Kind of hate to see him go. Obviously, last year gets hurt, and at the time the Jays were kind of like they literally had said to him, "We've seen all we need to see. You've got a spot here. You're a guy." Um, and all of the stock that he held at the time has disappeared into thin air. I mean, what do you make of the Valenzuela kid? Like, I don't
Yeah,
really
that
think
that
he's
was kind of an
that compelling.
interesting trade.
I get why it gets made. You need to open up the 40-man spot.
Yeah, you
Wagner's
need
a
some catching depth.
like it makes a lot of sense. I understand it. He's reporting to the AAA Bisons. He's a guy that maybe is a backup for you next year if everything goes right. And I believe I saw an article as well. I don't even remember who it was by, but it was actually a really well done article. But basically the idea was it's like a 40 FV, maybe a 40 plus FV guy, org depth. And at catcher, it's a bit different to have org depth than at other positions.
Yeah, I think the Wagner thing, obviously, you need the 40 spot. Um, they are kind of in a position right now where the catching depth in the organization is kind of non-existent. Phil Clark kind of seems like the whipping boy at this point. I don't know kind of when he's going to be prioritized. I think the defense there is really kind of turned them off as an organization, despite him. He still swings it okay, but without much power. So there's that, and so you bring in Valenzuela, by all reports, like really good catcher. Defense kind of seems to be the calling card, and for the bat, I mean, it just kind of seems like he profiles as a backup catcher long term. So, do you really even care about his hitting? Like a little bit, but when you're trying to develop somebody as a backup catcher, like if he can come in and frame and block and throw people out, then you'll be happy. I think he's was like fifth in or maybe he led. I can't even remember. All double A catchers. He was the top of the list in caught stealing percentage this year. So, there's that. He's got that going for him.
It's something. At least it's something. It's a bit of a nothing trade in some respects, but at the same time, you're trading a major leaguer for a minor leaguer, and it's a minor leaguer that you don't really have high hopes for. It is what it is. It's a situation, I guess, where you can kind of look at it as, right now you've got Ali Sanchez as your third catcher, and if Tyler Heineman goes down and Kirk is out, which does sound like he's pretty much back by start of next week, ideally. But it just provides a little bit of cushion for the catching depth. And I understand it, I get it. It's not that high on the priority list. It's just a little bit peculiar, I think, is maybe the way I would put it more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you'd love to trade Wagner for like that team's, 20th pitching prospect or whatever, like that you can kind of slot in and like maybe there's a little bit of upside there, but I think, I think we've probably already or we've already probably talked too much about this trade. Um, no, yeah,
That's a good way to
like
put it.
it's just it's catching depth. I think for a guy who had shown success at the major league level like Wagner, it's yeah, again, like you kind of see that notification come in and you're a little surprised because it's a guy who was seemed like he was gonna be their starting second baseman before they traded for Andres Gimenez. So um we'll see. Again, I think that he's has the potential to be like a pretty solid major league hitter. We saw it last year. I think he probably played a little bit above his power level last year. He's hitting doubles all over the place and hit a couple bombs, and we hadn't quite seen that this year. So you know, nice little run for him in Toronto. Ultimately short, but short but sweet, and it kind of go comes to an end with him just returning from his dad's Hall of Fame ceremony.
Exactly. And the Padres, of course, very active. Their biggest trade of the day, no doubt.
Yeah, Padres. Whew, what a day for AJ Preller. But what else is new? That AJ Preller is active at the trade deadline. One thing that Ross Atkins did mention in his post trade deadline availability was that France is going to see significant playing time against left-handed pitching. Where do you think that that kind of fits in with the Blue Jays roster? Because he's a guy who hasn't played much second base this year. So are they going to be, breaking out the infield glove, or is this like Vlad DH's Springer? Springer's been obviously really good as the DH and has been a little not so good in right field. So how does that all line up?
Yeah, that's that's beyond my pay grade, man. I wish I had an answer for you. What I do think is if you're just looking purely at a maybe a late inning, late game pinch hitter situation, that's where I think he's maybe most compelling. And then obviously because they've prioritized the flexibility to such an incredible degree, you can slot him in pinch hitting for Lo Perfido. You can slot him in pinch hitting for Nathan Lucas. You can slot him in pinch hitting for any number of guys. And you're able ultimately to have Davis Schneider fill in that spot. You're able to have Miles Strauss slip in. You're able to have another guy shuffle over. Like they have the flexibility really just to do what they kind of need to do defensively while still giving themselves opportunities to put in a bat. So maybe he's not going to get substantial playing time starting, but I do think that he'll get a lot of at bats by the end of the year just based on the pinch hitting situations because that does feel like a place that makes the most sense fit wise.
He's also only making $1 million, so if you have to cut ties with him at some point, like probably not the
Doesn't cost you all that much.
yeah, the Twins
It costs you one Ryan Yarbrough.
yeah. I just wonder like during that negotiation, they're probably like going back and forth about Varland and then they're getting to the finish line. Like you think Ross is like, and you give us Ty France.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
like the movie Draft Day. This is the second or like third
Exactly.
straight podcast where we reference some movies here, but where he's, on the phone with the Seahawks GM and he's like, who else can we get? And they're like, Putney.
Exactly.
And he's like, I want Putney too. And he's like, no
Exactly.
way.
I
And he's
want
like,
Putney. I want
yeah,
France.
yeah. And that was Ty France in this trade.
Exactly. Should we go a
We
little bit
go
into
back to Bieber, I
that's what
think.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say. Let's just discuss a little bit in the
Now that you've
context.
had time to stew on it,
Mhm.
and I know kind of earlier this morning it was kind of like, oh, I don't know, like obviously Steven, high price to pay. But the more we said it earlier this morning, there was gonna be we were gonna learn more about it. We were gonna see more about what's kind of the Bieber tenure in Toronto is gonna look like. And I like for you kind of having, all that information in your brain now, how are you feeling?
So definitely feel a little bit better about it. I'm just going through and trying to see if I can find. It's going to be a whole thing to try to find all the trades from today. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do so. Um, but just my sense is Sandy doesn't go. Joe Ryan doesn't go. Mason Miller goes for an arm and a leg and a foot and a hand and a knee and everything else. And the price to pay for starters, clearly, or even relievers, just arms in general, was really high. I'm not going to debate the upside on Shane Bieber. If you get 2020 or 2022 Shane Bieber, you are laughing all the way to the bank. And maybe you even extend him, and all of a sudden, you've made this incredible gamble, and all it cost you was your fourth best pitching prospect, arguably, right? That said, I still wonder if you could have gotten another guy, if you maybe could have found another way to go out and maybe add a different reliever for cheaper, maybe go out and get a guy. Like I always mispronounce his name. Colum, right? Is the guy.
I think it's
Coulomb.
Coulomb.
Coulomb. Maybe you go out and get him in the Varland deal added, and it doesn't cost you the additional pitching prospect. Again, I don't have the full list of trades in front of me. I do know there weren't that many starters dealt. Like Taj Bradley was another starter dealt. He was a
But
Griffin
even
Jack
like
swap.
he's
That's
a
not
triple A starter, right? Like that's not necessarily a major league impact starter that the Twins are getting.
exactly right. So, you know, I think they did okay in respect to deadline prices being really high this year. Can clearly see that was the case. It was a really exciting deadline, I think, as a result, because everybody kind of felt like they were kind of in it. And as a result, it turned into an incredible market and an incredible turn of events. But I just think there's a lot of uncertainty with Shane Bieber. You know, that contract is almost all dead weight. If he's good, he opts out. If he's bad, he opts in. And
But then maybe he's good in 2026.
oh boy, I guess we'll see. I
I,
guess we'll
I
see.
I think that this applies to Shane Bieber and Alek Manoah, right? Like the Tommy John recovery process is so finicky and it's so unpredictable, right? We've seen it with Sandy Alcantara where things haven't gone great for him. So whether Bieber comes back and looks like the old version of himself, I mean, that's still up in the air. We don't know. Obviously, he looked good in that last double A start, but again, that's a double A start, so kind of tough to read too much into the results from that. But at the end of the day, this is the Blue Jays team that is sitting in first place, and there wasn't a pitcher moved today or in the lead up to the deadline that I think is better than Shane Bieber when Shane Bieber's at his best. And, all the talk was they need to get a top of the rotation arm. And I think that we kind of fell into that boat too, where that's what we were saying. But, or I guess, with that, Joe Ryan didn't move. Sandy didn't move. Zach Gallen didn't move. All these guys who are like top
Did
of the
Merrill Kelly
rotation start.
move? Did
Merrill
Merrill
Kelly
Kelly?
did move. I was about to read you out the trade return for that. Um, but those guys don't move, right? And so the Blue Jays found like ultimately a little bit of a creative way to get top of the rotation upside, where if things click with Bieber and he's back in pitching well by September and October, it's a guy that you're comfortable handing the ball off to in the postseason. And this morning we were like, what if he's not able to work, all that deep into games? But well, problem
What if he
solved. You
is?
got Louis Varland. You got these guys who, Bieber, if he's great for 5 innings, you got four guys coming in behind him who you're going to feel pretty good about too. So I think
Yeah.
in the scenario where it works out, like like you said, you're laughing if it works out because this is the top of the rotation arm that they need, and they get it for, at the end of the day, what was by MLB Pipeline their number five
Yeah.
prospect.
They get it at a discount, really. You're not getting prime Shane Bieber
Yeah.
for a non-top 100 prospect and a single one at that.
Yeah. Merrill Kelly, right? I'm pretty pro Merrill Kelly. I think he's had a really nice year. I think he would, kind of be fit into that conversation with the Gossman, Barrios, Bassett, Scherzer, Lauer. Like he's kind of,
Doesn't have the
he
upside
he
of a
fits
Bieber.
right in that group, but he doesn't have the complete, I'm going to go out there and strike out a ton of guys and look like an ace. And he was moved for three prospects to the Texas Rangers, and it was, I believe, their number four, their number nine, and their number 14 prospects by MLB Pipeline. Shout out Mitch Bratt, Canadian hero, going to Arizona in that trade. But I think you look at the Merrill Kelly trade and you're like, well, that's a guy who's a playoff caliber pitcher, and he arguably went for a higher cost than Bieber did because Bieber's hurt. But at the end of the day, the Rangers probably need Kelly's innings more in the next couple months than the Blue Jays do from Bieber.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, actually. I think as we learned more with a full complete picture, I think this is a nice little therapy session for me.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little bit of, we're discussing our feelings, we're discussing our emotions, we're getting the INTJ charts out or whatever they're called, right? You've spelled it out pretty eloquently. I'm I'm a prospect hugger. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
think that much is a surprise. Every time the Blue Jays traded away a prospect, I mean, I can tell you, I tweeted something out as soon as they traded Jerome Watts Brown. I was miffed on the podcast when they traded
Cal Steven.
for trade Cal Steven, thank you. And I didn't even tell you, but my first reaction, I sent the message in the group chat being like, "Oh, I can dig Louis Varland," and I turn to Twitter and I click and it goes, "The return is Alan Roden and Kenji Rojas," and my immediate reaction was,
Yeah.
"So." Tells you what the prospect hugginess is like, it's there's certainly
Yeah.
and near and dear
Um,
to my heart. I love future value, maybe to a fault.
you and all 30 GMs in the league. So
Mhm.
I'll, I'll,
Except for
I'll
AJ Preller.
well, I mean, he just finds new ones. I don't know how they always, have guys backfilling to be top 100 prospects like every single year. Um, But, I will say, I think it's fair to like be disappointed when you see those guys move because, especially for us here where we do a lot of prospect stuff. You invest time into these guys, you watch their games, you pay attention to kind of what's going on with them. Um, in our case, we talked to some of them, none of the guys that have moved, but I think it's fair to be disappointed when you see them move. But, I think that you see the returns and you kind of understand them. And one thing for Steven too that we didn't know that kind of came out in the Cleveland Guardians press release when they traded him was that Steven is on the IL right now, which we knew, but we didn't know that it was with a shoulder impingement. So, that kind of scary
A little
medical,
bit of
well,
a
like not a scary medical diagnosis. Like he'll probably be fine. And again, it's a guy who was near his college career high in innings pitched already this year. So I think
but
he's going to be shut
anything with
down.
a shoulder for a pitcher is a red
Yeah,
flag.
I mean, any
Elbow
any
these
injury
days is
is, right?
not, yeah. Elbow, TJ less than it was once upon a time given the medical advances, but messing up your shoulder as a pitcher is a frightening proposition, obviously. So there's news that we were not privy to.
Yeah, it'll be kind of interesting to see how all these guys develop, right? I think when you look at like Steven, Watts Brown, Roden, Rojas, if you had to pick out of that group of four, which player would accrue the most WAR, who would you pick? And that's kind of not a fair question because Roden's a position player, but I
Here,
think
here's what I'll
I'll I
say.
think
Here's
I'll
what I'll say.
lead.
Here's what I'll say. Here's what I'll say. Roden probably would be my number one, but that group of three pitchers probably outproduces him. But there will be one pitcher in that group, like just based on likelihood, that will carry the load in terms of asset value, in terms of accruing that war, basically. So if you want me to pick a guy out of that group, it probably is Cal, obviously, shoulder notwithstanding.
I
But
just
I
think
guess
the
Roden is
Guardians
probably
fit for Cal.
the Guardians fit is just so compelling. Even if he doesn't turn into like a great top of the rotation guy, he just screams. The Guardians develop guys like no one's business. Just it makes a ton of sense. and it seems like a really, really just a nice match for him. This episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast is brought to you by BioSteel. Use code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order at biosteel.ca. Again, that's code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order. For all your high performance hydration needs, visit biosteel.ca. Thank you again to BioSteel for sponsoring today's episode.
So as we kind of go forward here, obviously, this is the team that they've got now. Bieber, I think Ross said that they were gonna have him make like, or they're gonna figure it out with him. But it sounded like one or two more rehab starts. So, he'll probably pitch at Buffalo, a couple times here in August. But, as they kind of go through that, what do you think is the approach? Like, you think it's kind of you get him back and then you go six man with that group and then you kind of you shorten your bullpen by one, but you feel pretty good about your bullpen, or would you kind of feel like you would want to move one guy to the pen out of that group?
I just don't know. It's because it's Eric Lauer is the only guy that's even possibly an option to move to the pen, but it just doesn't make very much sense for your best pitcher this year, arguably, at least by ERA, to be moved to the pen, right? I would expect that they'll probably go six man. They probably will protect Bieber's innings to a certain extent, and even protect the rest of
That's
the
fair,
starters'
yeah.
innings to a certain extent. You can protect Scherzer's innings. Maybe you give him more innings
Maybe you
in
just
the playoffs. Maybe
piggyback
you
Scherzer and Bieber 5-4.
that wouldn't be the worst idea either, right? I'm sure neither guy would be super thrilled with that.
Couple Cy Young winners.
Whoever gets the
The
second
back
half of
half,
that back
yeah.
to back. But to me, there's just the flexibility, and of course, you'll have the 28-man roster open up
Yeah.
in the weeks to come. Even if a guy like a Flu Hardy has to ultimately go down to suffice a six-man rotation, he'll be back up within a week or two following that.
Yeah. Um On the bullpen side, I mean, obviously, we talked. I think it's Hoffman, Dominguez, Yariel, Little, Varland, Fisher, and then the last two spots in that bullpen are kind of going to be like up for grabs. Like I think Nance and Fluharty are like kind of the front runners to take those spots. Like they're in them right now. Nance has been pretty decent, and then there just isn't the reliever depth on the 40 man to like really take that unless you're replacing Fluharty with Justin Brule again. But I don't really anticipate there being a huge debate there. Do you kind of have a preferred structure for that bullpen? Obviously, if Jimmy and Sandlin come back, like they just take those two spots and
Yeah,
it's you
I don't
wipe your
think it's
hands with
even
it.
worth.
But
Honestly, obviously
you
the
don't want to
bullpen's going to
debate
shuffle.
Nick
There's not that
Sandlin
much. Yeah.
versus Tommy Nance.
Well, I just don't know if there's. I don't
What's
know
up
if
with
it's
Angel
that close.
Bastardo? Because he's got to be on the active roster
He's
if he
gotta
comes
be.
back.
He's got elbowitis. Here's actually I do want to ask you this because I've just let my mind wander a little bit as you were discussing the bullpen. Who are the four starters for the playoffs?
Um,
Is it just the four guys you think it is? Do you just not let Scherzer and Lauer start games in the playoffs? Do you tell Chris Bassett, thank you for your service? We're going to actually go elsewhere because you're a pending free agent? Do you look at Barrios' StatCast page and the struggles he's had over a large sample and go like, we're good, thanks? Do you bet on Bieber being hurt? Like, what do you do?
I mean, if we're building it here on July 31st, um, post trade deadline in this scenario where you're envisioning the Blue Jays are one in the postseason and two, you know, have these
Like if you
guys
were to
available.
just very quickly, I actually think it'll be really interesting. We should probably do like a weekly check-in or an episode by episode check-in
Yeah.
who your four playoff starters are
I
because I
mean,
actually think that'll be we'll do that. We should do that.
is it not just like who's pitching best at the time?
I'd hope so, but
Like
I
right
mean,
right now, the
do
guys who are
you
pitching best
I
are
just wonder
Osman.
if they're gonna be like, you know what, Bassett, we respect you too much as a competitor and we want you over Eric Lauer, despite the fact that Lauer has quantifiably been better than Chris Bassett in almost every capacity. And the same goes for, Scherzer won't get the start, but Barrios will because, oh, we gave Barrios the money. We can't not start him in the playoffs. you look like an idiot if Barrios blows up in the playoffs. I think I have a little bit of fear of how that's gonna roll.
Yeah, I don't, really have like too much of a preference right now. I think the way guys have pitched, like I think Gosman, you give the ball in one of the first two games. If Bieber comes back and looks good, you give him the ball in one of the first two games. Games 3 and 4 of say a division series, if you're picking between Bassett, Lauer, Scherzer, and Barrios, like I don't really think that you can go all that wrong in any of those scenarios. I think that there's likely to be some things that'll shift and change between now and day one of the postseason, and I think that the matchups too will play an interesting role in that. I think you look at the teams that are likely to be there, whether it be the Yankees, obviously, they're pretty balanced, I guess. Bellinger, Wells, Judge. I don't know. Like, do you just pick whoever handles Judge the best and you let them go? The Tigers, like Riley Green is atop their order as a lefty, but they also have Torkelson and Glaber. So, like, would you not want Eric Lauer in that type of series? I think of the Astros, and they're pretty righty heavy now after Carlos Correa gets traded there. Even though they added Jesus Sanchez, who we have discussed on this podcast before, or the Mariners as well. Like I think that it's you base that decision off of who's pitching well at the time and who you're matching up against.
That's fair. You know what? That's the
Did you
sensible,
want my
that's the
did you want
smart thing to say.
my you if I'm making the decision today, Bieber game one, Gosman game two, hot take, Max Scherzer game three, because that would just be sick. And game four, Chris Bassett, game four. If it's at home, if it's on the road, Jose Barrios. That's my hedge. What
uh,
would yours be?
Bieber, Gosman, Lauer game three, Scherzer game four.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think if Lauer, by the end of the year has, he's probably got what, like another 7 starts in this season, depending on how they kind of schedule it. So that's probably, gets him to 120 innings or whatever. Like if he's at 120 innings and he has a 2.68 ERA still, then yeah, I'm okay with you going ahead with Eric Lauer in the postseason.
I think
Dude,
that's about right. I think that's about where we're at.
I think that kind of covers it for the Blue Jays. I mean, obviously the lineup stuff, like France, kind of he'll fit in where he fits in. I don't necessarily like have any otherworldly takes about how this roster is going to shape up. I think, the Jimenez and Santander and Kirk and Varsho stuff is all going to kind of push guys off, and then you're going to get a pretty consistent group in there down the stretch, and it's going to be, Kirk, Vlad, Jimenez, Ernie, Bo, Varsho, Barger, Springer, and you're going to be seeing those guys like every single day as you go forward. If you want to put Santander in there, then sure, but I think that the offense has done pretty well for itself I don't, sure, they could have added a bat, but I think the way that Loperfido and Schneider and Lucas have all performed, that you feel pretty good about sticking with that group going forward.
Yeah, someone in that group will be hot going into late September, early October period. That'll be a guy you're leaning on heavily as you approach, you know, the playoffs.
Yeah. Let's go around the league a little bit. I obviously think, the Yankees certainly have themselves a deadline. I think that's kind of the headlining point. Obviously, the Padres, we can touch on that deal and the Padres kind of going crazy, but I think, looking inward at the AL East, the Yankees going out and they get Bednar, they get Camilo Doval, they get Jake Bird. Obviously they had already done some shopping with McMahon and Ahmed Rosario. Um, how do you feel about them making those ads?
I don't know, is their bullpen better than the Blue Jays? Because I think it might be. And it's a little frightening. I think the Jays starting rotation, as things stand, probably also is right there with them. Obviously, Max Fried and Carlos Rodon are a different story altogether. But I think the fact that Jays can go six deep You're not really worried about any playoff games for the Blue Jays. If you're the Yankees, maybe games three, four. Who knows who's starting
It's
those games?
it's funny because it's like it's almost the opposite issue that the Yankees have, where they've got the two guys at the top of the rotation, and they're like, yeah, game one Fried, game two Rodon. Where the Blue Jays are like, I don't know who I'd give the ball to in game one. I'm sure that they probably have an idea, but on the outside looking in, maybe not as clear. Um, but and then beyond those two in New York, that they kind of have
Like, is
some
Marcus
some
Stroman
question
starting
marks,
a
right?
playoff game?
Like
Is Luis Hill starting a playoff game? Good question.
yeah, it's kind of funny that they didn't add like some Carter starter. We already talked about like that there was no starters really moved outside of Bieber, Merrill Kelly, Zach Littell, Charlie Morton, is like kind of the only guys that come to mind that were on the move. And they kind of go with those three bullpen arms, and their bullpen's good. It's very Yankees to me of them to like add like all these name brand guys.
Very
Um
name brand. Very, very name brand.
I think the funny thing is like they obviously are set to lose Devin Williams after this year, as he's a pending free agent. Um, but now they just added three guys with team control, so I think that Devin Williams will not be back in pinstripes next year for sure.
Well, especially the way he started the year, and obviously he cleaned it up a little bit, but I think he's a little bit, to a certain extent, played himself, maybe even out of New York. That's a market that if you don't perform,
They eat you up.
they will not appreciate your presence.
Um, Elsewhere in the AL East, obviously the
Well, let's
Rays.
go. I
You
want to
got
talk a
more
little Red
Yankees.
Sox. We can
Well,
no. I want to talk a little Red Sox there,
I
just
mean,
just to dunk on them a little bit, if you'll allow me, because I don't think that we're going to talk about them that long. How long did you think Joe Ryan was going to be a Red Sox? Because I think there was a period in
um.
there for about 5, 10 minutes that you
Yeah,
were kind of
well,
like, oh no.
when the Twins traded for Correa, or sorry, when they traded Correa, and then Morosi tweets out Joe Ryan, or the Red Sox pursuing Joe Ryan, and then Francis Romero tweets out Joe Ryan is expected to be traded. Then you're kind of like, oh, you start kind of putting the pieces together, and you're like, ah, it kind of seems like maybe Joe Ryan is is bound to be a Red Sox here, but they. You know, don't pull it off. I think Chris Cotillo tweeted out what did he tweet out? He tweeted out that Craig Breslow in his like post deadline availability said, I understand the frustration and disappointment. There's not a lot of sympathy for how hard we tried to get details across the line. So to me, that says like, they were working hard on this Joe Ryan trade, but they just couldn't
Well, the
quite get
word
it
was
done.
not even close. So
Oh, did really somebody said that? I
someone
didn't see
said they
that.
were not even close. I think it was Cotillo as well that tweeted that out. The source on the Joe Ryan to Red Sox rumors. Not even close was the words used. Um, so I mean that's really all the Red Sox did. They didn't do very much else. They traded away the best piece they got back in the in the Devers trade for a
Yeah,
pending free agent that got
yeah,
lit up by the Red Sox like a week ago.
yeah. Dustin May
Um,
and Steven Matz. That's your Red Sox deadline.
yeah. I mean, if I'm a Red Sox fan, I wouldn't be exactly thrilled.
They could
Let's
they've been playing well. They could be in like I mean, obviously, their front office has been under fire for not quite living up to the hype, but Bregman's probably going to opt out at the end of the year if he doesn't come back. Like there could be, some really I mean, the fans there are already really upset. But there could be like some really really upset fans
It
if
could
Bregman
be it
walks.
could be messy there. Okay, yeah, let's rapid fire here through the rest of the ALE because you brought up the Rays before I rudely interrupted you. The Taj Bradley for Griffin Jack stuff is the biggest one there, right? Is there anyone else
Yeah.
of particular note to touch on there?
Ray's kind of interesting, obviously Jax. I think he's like fits in the relievers who are going to be starters next year group. Just seems like, kind of perfect for the Rays. Seems like a really Raysy player for them. The Taj Bradley thing is interesting that they're kind of punting on him for this, but Jax has been really good. It kind of, you don't love it for because it is a really good pitcher going back to the Rays. They did like the weird kind of buy sell thing again where they trade away Zach Littell. They trade away Danny Jansen. They trade away Jose Caballero. But they get a Adrian Hauser from the White Sox, which I think again, any pitcher going to the Rays is a scary proposition. They land Nick Fortes, who is like an infinitely better defender than Danny Jansen. So you're not surprising to see the Rays kind of take that path. They were sneaky one of the busier teams there. But I mean, overall, I think the thing to me is like they probably got better at the end of the day. But do they get enough better enough to really change all that much? Like probably not.
No, I think it's exactly that. They improved as the tweet goes. I love this trade for the Rays. Who'd they get and who'd they give up, or who'd they give up and who'd they get? Um, they did well, obviously. They're the Tampa Bay Rays. They tend to do well. But ultimately, it does feel like they kind of did, they were a little Red Sox adjacent in that they don't seem like they made a serious push to necessarily compete for the division.
The Jax thing is scary long term, I think. Like that could be really, really good fit there. Orioles, I mean, it kind of sucks that you get them at home right before the deadline and the offense kind of pops
They
off and then
torch
they
you and then promptly trade the whole group that killed you.
yeah, O'Hearn and Laureano to the Padres for six prospects. Like I don't even know.
Throw it at the
Like as
wall and see what sticks, I
yeah.
guess.
And then Mullins goes to the
The
Mets for
Mets,
three
yeah.
prospects, Charlie Morton to the Tigers in like a last minute trade. So, that's probably just we'll take what we can get for him. They send Kittredge to the Cubs. They send Urias to the Astros in a trade that probably looks kind of useless for Houston now that they have their other third baseman. And then obviously they had already traded Soto and Dominguez. You got any Orioles thoughts? I just think like kind of bad timing that the Jays had to play them right then.
Unfortunate. Unfortunate they got smoked by a bunch of guys that are no longer Baltimore Orioles, but it's the way she goes.
Around the
Um,
AL, I think obviously Tigers to me nothing like super huge. Like obviously
very conservative
I think
deadline.
they added like four right-handed pitchers and again having just seen them like they're kind of going through it on the pitching side right now, so kind of need like maybe that refreshment. I like Charlie Morton. I don't know if how much he's gonna kind
How
of
much he has any
flip the
juice
script
left.
in Detroit. Notable though is Houston, Texas, and Seattle. Obviously, Josh Naylor, yeah, Gino Suarez going to Seattle, like pretty big deals there. Seattle, like maybe the most complete team in the American League. I think that's not
I think
off
that's a
base to
pretty
say.
consensus take. Pretty consensus take, definitely.
And then the Astros, they get Correa, who hasn't ultimately been like that good this year, but kind of
Still
feels
Carlos
like
Correa, still a guy with the
yeah,
capabilities
and
of
he's
being.
moving to third base now, so it'll be a good fit there. Obviously, they don't have Paredes, which is why they have to make that trade. And then they grab Jesus Sanchez. They were really in on pitching, but they couldn't quite get it, which
Yeah, it sounded like
I
Cease was a guy they really,
yeah,
really pushed for.
I think that that's kind of the thing with the Astros is where, again, like kind of same thing as the Yankees. You got Hunter Brown and Framber Valdez atop that rotation, but they don't have like the depth pieces beyond them because they've just been so hurt. So, I think Astros like good for them for being so active and getting Correa and getting Sanchez and Urias as well. But at the end of the day, like they right now to me, like they're kind of where they were at with Paredes, like they're kind of at the same level, and where they're going to be in the postseason is almost dependent on the guys that they get back from injury. Like does Jordan come back and
Become
be
Jordan once
be
again,
Jordan?
right?
Yeah,
Better than he was beforehand to a very, very strong degree.
yeah. And then the Rangers, we already talked about the Merrill Kelly trade. They also add, seemingly Blue Jays target, Phil Maton. They add Danny Coulombe. They traded Cody Heuer, I believe is how you pronounce his name. But again, they've been playing well lately, and I think like a nice deadline for them. But again, nothing groundbreaking, but like overall, I think
Uh,
the AL West is the division where like things really kind of went
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, a little Jay-Z almost I would call it, just a lot of chip shots. I think for them, the bigger thing is that they ultimately are. I mean, they've obviously come out of the gates here second half ripping hot, but yeah, a couple relievers, bit of an aging team in a lot of respects. We'll see exactly what this means for them in a broader sense. But for now, I think at the end of the day, more than anything else, I think it's just for them a chance to just supplement their group because they're going to go as far as their stars will take them. They weren't
Yeah.
certainly going to be adding any stars given, you know,
We
they
had
have
a
very clear pieces and very clear spots on their
we had
team.
another pump fake trade from the Rangers today.
Oh
Did you
yes,
see
oh
that
yes,
the
oh yes.
Adelise to
The
the Mets thing?
and did you see what they when they tweeted out their lineup?
Yeah, yeah.
Breaking
No.
news, our starting lineup.
Oh, did they? That's
They
hilarious.
did.
Good for them.
It was very funny.
Um, yeah, I think that kind of covers the AL. NL. I mean, I think we can kind of like just kind of handpick some trades here to talk about, but got to start with Mason Miller to the Padres. Like, speak of guys who are going to be starting next year. Man, what a price to pay! Like Leo DeVries for a number three
Super
prospect,
fun.
top five prospect in
Super fun.
baseball. Like,
I don't
hell of
even
a trade.
care. You know, listen, he's 18 years old. He's in the high minors. I get it. He's not like killing it. I know metrics wise, he compares favorably at a much younger age to Jackson Merrill in their low minors. So I get why he is the number three prospect in baseball. Surely that is not an accident. But oh my God, that is so much fun. I wish the Blue Jays could have been in that. Not even a chance in hell that Arjun Amala and Trey Savage were going to get that done.
Yeah, that's No, I was talking to somebody and I'm like, yeah, I like the deadlines for X, X, and X. And then I was like, I actually like it for the A's too. Like what they're kind of building there. Man, they are going to be raking when they move to Las Vegas. You got
They're gonna
Rooker,
be
Lawrence
really good in
Butler, Jacob
Vegas.
Wilson, Soderstrom, Nick Kurtz, Leo DeVries. Like
They're
they,
building something. Could you imagine if they're ahead of schedule and they're just raking in
well,
Sacramento?
I mean, they kind of are doing that this year. They just don't have any pitching.
I know.
Is there anybody? Is there anybody more?
It would be really funny and really messed up to play a playoff game at a
Yeah.
minor league stadium.
Is there anybody more upset about the trade deadline today than Luis Severino?
I mean, was he going anywhere? Was anyone really paying that
Well,
money?
I mean, I probably not, but I still think that it's funny that I think it was the report. It was probably like a month ago at this point where there's like
Oh, he's
the
yeah,
A's are
he
like
hates it there.
the A's are excited to get him out the door or whatever the report was. Like it's kind of funny, but
He's probably displeased to say the least. That'll be a winter thing. You got to think. There's no way he
yeah,
lasts into the next season or next year with them.
yeah. Other trades. I mean, do you have any thoughts on the Mets bullpen ads? Obviously, they go pretty hard there with Rogers and Duran, or sorry, Rogers and Helsley, and then the Phillies get Duran and Bader. Reds get Cabrian Hayes. Like I mean, just a handful of moves there. Do any of those like pique your interest enough?
I mean, obviously Duran is the big name there, of course. The Brian Hayes one is super interesting. I wonder if he gets away from Pittsburgh and learns how to hit again. Obviously, he has struggled immensely over the last 2 years. Um, but if anywhere is going to fix him, it's the Great American Small Park. I'll tell you that much.
We'll see. I saw Mike Petriello tweeted that he hits the ball out in front, but he has like an oppo approach angle, which is, like kind of like a juxtaposition. Like it's not
A little weird. Maybe moves up or back in the
yeah, I don't
box
know.
type situation. Who knows?
I'll point out Michael Soroka to the Cubs, Canadian moved.
Friend of the program, a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Hometown
Hero.
connection. Sure, we'll say. But yeah, no, good ad for the Cubs. I mean, he would have been interesting for the Jays, I think, as like kind of that long relief option. Obviously, peripheral stuff has looked much better than the results. So the Cubs have a really, really good defense. So I'm sure he'll be very excited to pitch in front of Dansby Swanson and Pete Crow Armstrong and Nico Horner and all these guys that they've got there.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think adding a Bieber and adding a Varland makes adding a Soroka a little redundant. You
Yeah,
would
yeah.
have been putting Soroka in the Varland situation, and Varland vastly superior baseball player.
Well, we won't say that about the friend
Not
of
to
the show.
disrespect him or nothing.
All right. Before we go, gonna put you on the spot here. Tell me your favorite Jays trade of the deadline and your favorite non-Jays trade, but non-Mason Miller, Yohan
Ah,
Duran,
that's
Ryan
no
Helsley
fun. That's no
category.
fun. That's no fun. Yeah, the Jays trade, I think you've got to go with the Varland one just because of the team control there. Obviously, you give up a lot in prospects, and you saw my reaction. It was displeasure at the return. But after a little bit of insight and a little bit of kind of talking myself into it and calming myself down as a noted prospect hugger, upside there is really strong and definitely could see a universe where that's a trade that defines this era of Blue Jays baseball, where he becomes a starter, becomes a really good number three starter for the Blue Jays, and all of a sudden you've found a great rotation piece at a really cheap cost, both asset wise and price wise. In terms of around the league deals, I think that were particularly fun, and it's no fair you won't let me pick Mason Miller because God, that
I
was
mean, come on, that's
electric.
it's a layup.
It's a layup. It's a layup, but it's a layup for a reason. Listen, the Yankees did some really nice stuff, and it kills me to say it, but their bullpen ads, and I know that they're all brand name guys. You know they paid big prices, or well, not big price. They paid for big names. They didn't pay big prices on them, and I think the Yankees did very well on the bullpen side. Um, it's going to be really interesting if they meet in a playoff series. It might be a first to five after five innings type situation.
Yeah, that would be pretty fun. I'll give you my two. Jays trade, Shane Bieber, favorite trade. Give me all the Cy Young winners. Just going to be really exciting to see how he looks in a Blue Jays jersey. I think, the ceiling there is incredible
Just
if it
imagining
turns
where
out.
your answer was like, "Oh, I love the Will Wagner trade."
Could you imagine? I should have said that as a joke. That would have been great if I had come out and said I love Brandon Valenzuela for Will Wagner. Yeah, Bieber, love the side, love the pedigree. Just love kind of getting the chance to watch really good baseball players play. So, around the league, I kind of became like more fascinated with Willie Castro as we got closer to the deadline. So him to the Cubs, I think interesting, but like ultimate like overarching storylines of the deadline, it's hard not to say the Correa deal.
That's a good take. That's a good take. Just a real fascinating reunion and the twins selling off and oh, suddenly they're in massive debt. Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah, we'll see what that turns into. Did you see the guy that they traded him for is a like a 28-year-old
I
pitcher
did
in
see
high
this. I
A with like
did
a
see
7
this.
ERA
You know
and
what it's kind of given? It's kind of given 2017 Josh Donaldson for Julian or 2018 Josh Donaldson for Julian Merriweather.
yeah. Imagine being that guy. You have like a 7 ERA in high A
Who, me? Who, me?
and they're like, hey, we just traded you for Carlos Correa. It's like, what?
Goes right to the top of his resume.
Yeah, that's man, what a day. What a day it was. It's just love these days. Obviously they're super crazy and even cooler when the Jays pull off some really big moves. So
Absolutely.
I'll give you last word. Jays grade for the day and for the deadline.
All right, I'm gonna, like I said, I think that they cleaned up a little bit, especially we learned some more stuff. B minus. Good deadline, not a great one. Wish they'd have maybe swung for a bigger name, might not have been available. At the end of the day, they paid premiums. They didn't necessarily get premium players, but there were some ridiculous prices on the whole, and the Jays didn't quite have to pay quite the insane premiums of some other teams.
I'll give them a B for Brandon Valenzuela.
A W for Will Wagner.
W's up. Yeah. All right. Well, with all that, we are gonna run. That was quite a day for us and quite a day for baseball. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View Podcast. If you're listening along on the audio provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I am at Worden_Zach. Jori is at J Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BED_pod. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the weekend series.